Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for the final session, session 4 of day 2 of Cherry Bekaert's 2025 Government and Public Sector Virtual Conference. My name is Danny Martinez, a partner here at Cherry Bekaert, and I lead our Government and Public Sector Accounting Advisory Group. In our last session, we will guide government professionals through the key success factors for selecting and implementing an ERP system, while addressing common challenges and strategies to overcome them. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers for today, George Delpret, Managing Director, and Jim Holman, Director. And we also are going to have some guests to share their experiences on a panel. So thank you all again for your attendance, and go ahead and take it away, George.
Hey, thanks, Danny. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is George Delpret. As Danny said, I'm a managing director here at Cherry Bekaert. And in my career, I've spent a lot of time helping various organizations of all sizes, primarily public sector organizations, navigate through the challenging process of selecting and implementing an ERP system. And we talk about ERP systems that can often include your human capital management system, your payroll systems, and other ancillary systems. And it's never been easy through the multiple implementations that I've been involved in. And what we wanted to do today is just share some lessons that we've learned and help some of our customers navigate through, and then hear from some executives that are walking in the shoes of implementing an ERP on a panel later in the session today. So we're really looking forward to you to have a conversation with you about these topics. Jim, you want to do a quick introduction of yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Thanks, George. So as George mentioned, Jim Holman, I'm a director within our technology advisory group within CFO Advisory at Cherry Bekaert. I've been here since 2017, primarily focused on mid-sized local governmental entities, state government, commercial organizations, trying to align and optimize their business processes with the technology that they've currently got deployed, ERP being the biggest member of that. So something to think about is that even when done well, ERP is disruptive and expensive. So hopefully the content that we share with you guys today will be meaningful, and the guests that we have here that are actively making successes out of this very treacherous journey will give some insight into what you might think of and consider as you may undergo this same journey.
Thanks, Jim. And Jim and I are going to go back and forth and tag team the discussion with you today. So we're going to start with a polling question. Do you believe that your current ERP will effectively serve your organization's needs over the next 3 to 5 years? Yes, no, or what is an ERP? Take a minute to answer that question for us, and then we'll talk about the responses. Great. Well, more than half of you are in good shape, and that's great to see. There's been a lot of changes in the technology landscape with ERPs and migrations away from on-premise system to new cloud-based systems. And a lot of times the older systems are not meeting organizational needs. So there is a need to upgrade. So the other 35% of you that need to upgrade will hopefully learn some things. And we love to see comments from folks in the chat about things that you've learned that you think are more important to helping you navigate through the ERP journey that you've been through. Jim?
All right, thanks, George. So looking at what ERP is, and this is a Gartner term going back into the early 90s that came from manufacturing. It stands for actually enterprise resource planning, but it really essentially means the core business system technology that operates your organization. So if you look at the center green circle of core ERP systems with that next orbit of 6 other circles, that light green color is typically what modern ERPs are either expected to provide out of the box or to offer with a bolt-on or add-on a fully integrated complementary package. If you look at the outer darker green rectangles, those used to be 30 years ago expected to be included within an ERP platform. So there was really no concept of an application programming interface or API. There was no easy way to integrate outside systems into your core financials. And as a result, local government tended to end up with ERP systems that were either purpose-built for government only or were giant monolith of ERPs, such as SAP or Oracle. So what we're going to talk a little bit about today is things to look for that make these solutions either a good fit or a great fit or not a fit. So these are some areas that we want to cover, and looking at things like citizen portal, parks and recreation, utility billing. These are now no longer captive within the core ERP. And a lot of organizations are able to pick and choose a best of breed approach to bring this functionality to bear. All right, so whether you are a yes or a no, the what's an ERP, or as we said before, what's an ERP, yes or no, doesn't necessarily mean that yeses are on new ERPs. It just means that you think the ERP is going to meet your needs over the next 3 to 5 years. But if you're looking at either you're on an older ERP, and an old ERP in this case is either something that is legacy technology, say it's an on-premise technology where you have local servers, that one or more servers that run your application. If it's something that is a proprietary architecture, not tied to, say, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, things like that, you're leaning towards those old ERP pieces of technology. So let's talk a little bit about what are those operational inefficiencies and how does it limit public sector organizations. If you look over on the right, there's the big 7 financial reporting challenges that come to be where you're not able to produce your standard reporting packet directly out of the ERP. You're having to use either middleware or Microsoft Excel to produce those by hand. Integration challenges, which we've talked about before. If you find it difficult to get content from outside your ERP inside, and it's a regular occurrence, that's a common pain point of old ERPs. Data accessibility is very similar to integrations. Are you able to get data in and out of the system easily? Administrative inefficiencies. A lot of this ties to like setting up users, configuring security and permissions, running audit reports. Is it difficult to do that? These are very common within older ERPs, usually leading organizations into expensive support contracts with the ERP providers. Compliance and regulatory, old ERPs just can't keep up with the new changes of laws and regulations that require a different and more significant levels of compliance. Lastly, technology support and technology maintenance and resource constraints are all really connected, because where the technology is old-fashioned, difficult to deploy and maintain, you tend to need more people to keep the beast running. And this makes it more difficult to comply with Freedom of Information Act, Florida Sunshine Rules, citizen data requests. All things that should be very easy and simple and streamlined become much more difficult and burdensome. These are all areas where older ERPs suffer. So looking at within government and public sector, where do we line on this timeline? So what you'll notice is, if you've seen any of our previous presentations, you notice that this block is really shifted back one set of decades compared to commercial ERP. Because what we see is that government and public sector ERP tends to lag by about 10 years what's out there in the private sector, although that gap is rapidly shrinking. So the 70s and 80s, definitely mini computers, mainframes, AS400s, IBM Power Platform, HP 4000s. If you're on any of those things and you still answered yes, trust me, you're not on the right ERP that is going to get you into the next decade. So client server, the orange box, we did see things such as Microsoft Dynamics or Solomon or Great Plains was very common for smaller entities. That's really a client server. So you'll have a desktop client over here and a server over there. Web-based platforms started to appear in the early 2000s, and software as a service and cloud adoption, which is not the same, just having a browser. You could still have a client server with a browser. 2010, we really started to see SaaS and cloud adoption. And then lastly, now we're talking advanced cloud ERPs, we're talking artificial intelligence integration, and really the closing of a gap between public sector technology and the private sector technology. So it's a very exciting time to be looking at new types of technology that can help your entity.
So as you start thinking about your ERP implementation, there are a number of risks that you need to navigate through and be mindful of. I think the first step that folks often go through, and it's hard, is capturing the system requirements. What are the things that the system needs to be able to accomplish for you? And oftentimes we see that folks that are doing this think about what they're doing now today, and they're essentially taking a lift and shift mindset into the new system. And so they may capture all sorts of things that a new system needs to be able to do that may have been a customization that was incorporated into the old system that a new cloud ERP isn't going to react well to. Instead of looking at a business process and thinking about, well, there's 3 steps in this process, maybe we could do it in 1 step or 2 steps and change how we do that and adapt to the way that the cloud system is configured. So as you start to think about requirements, you have to figure out what to capture and then how to prioritize it. There's things that the system must be able to do, nice to haves, and you have to be able to effectively be able to differentiate between those and prioritize them effectively. Modern cloud SaaS ERPs don't always do the same things that old ERPs do. We're working with a client right now on a PeopleSoft system. The world was their oyster. They could have PeopleSoft do whatever they want and customize it. The new Oracle Cloud Fusion system is not built that way. So it's requiring them to have to modify and rethink some of their business processes. And that's been very difficult. It requires a lot of change management. And you have to really explain what a cloud system can and can't do. You can do some customizations or extensions, but it's really not the way that it's designed. And that affects that culture, the culture that wants to do things the way that I do it now, especially as you get farther away from the leadership level. This is the way that I perform my business. I need to be able to perform it in the same way. It becomes a very difficult balance to try to find the right requirements and get them into the new system. There's also a different cost structure with the modern SaaS system, and getting used to that and figuring out what those total costs of ownership will be is an important part of the planning process and a risk to navigate through. As you're implementing a new system and trying to determine what requirements the new system needs to be able to accomplish, you need to work to build that consensus across departments. Especially, Jim flashed that chart of all the different peripheral systems to an ERP. As you're working with those stakeholders and thinking about what third-party applications could maybe be used for utility building and how that's going to interface with your ERP system, it's important to build that consensus, and you need the right levels of leadership. And then the other big challenge that we often see, and we're seeing this with a client right now, they're having to put out an RFP for staff augmentation services, is it is a big time burden on your teams to be able to do their day jobs and participate in the ERP planning and implementation process. And many often go beyond the schedules that were established, putting even more pressure on them. So as you're planning a new ERP system, it's important to think about the capacity of your current teams and thinking about backfills that will be able to help them through the navigation process there. So here are some critical success factors to think about. There are lots, just key requirements and strategic considerations. So what does the system need to be able to do? What are my accounting needs? Do I have multi-entities? So, I work for a city, I have to be able to pull in a utility entity with its own billing. Do I need that capability? Do I have grants? Do I need reporting back to the federal government? What does that need to look like? What is my chart of accounts need to look like? What should the financial reports that I need to produce for my audit need to look like, and for other stakeholders? And then strategic considerations are, how can I scale this system and grow over time? How can I take advantage of the modern architectures? What's it going to cost me? What's the affordability factor for us in our organization? And so, how do we factor what we can spend into our overall planning process? And some organizations do this alone. Others get partners, partners to help with the migration process or partners to help with the implementation. And it's important to evaluate the expertise that those partners bring and will help with the implementation process.
So when an organization is selecting an ERP, whether you're running with an RFP or without, if you're using a trusted third party or you're doing this yourself, one thing that we found in looking at organizations that have struggled is that anyone that's going to do this with or without a third party really should have a process. And what we found is that in the modern software as a service model, where you're not required to underlay the hundreds of thousands of dollars for software, where you purchase the software and it's a major capital expense, it's over time will cost more, but it is a much more gradual spend, that it's possible that the licensing and the implementation services that you may expect to see fall below what your procurement guidelines would call for an RFP. So it is possible. What we found is that there are many entities, local governmental, state governmental entities, that depending on what you're purchasing are going to subscribe to, since you're really not buying it, is that it may fall below your spend level that permits you to undertake the selection without an RFP. I wouldn't recommend that without a trusted third party that is very well versed in appropriate candidates that you should consider. But if you're able to undergo a selection with a trusted third party without an RFP, I'd encourage you at least to have that conversation, because what we find is that there's a lot of high quality ERP providers that don't respond to RFPs at all. So consider, is this something that we actually have to do an RFP on? If you look below, you'll see a timeline or a project structure that we undertake with organizations that are looking to select an ERP. This could be an add-on as well. It could be human resources information system. It could be document management, but it's a similar type of process. Next slide, Drew. So in the event that you do need an RFP, what we need to make sure of is that we have a robust process that is really front-loaded in that section in blue, that's really driven towards key business or operational and financial requirements, to make sure that when you're producing and publishing an RFP, that you're clearly communicating the key factors of success, as well as the things that are more obvious, such as budgetary considerations. But that blue area really needs to identify things like integrations, data security, user access, auditability, remote access, extensibility, a lot of that more modern framework that needs to be communicated to providers, so you're getting a high quality response and as many high quality responses as possible. So as we mentioned just a moment ago, the key requirements are really going to be critical. So there are a lot of providers that I'm sure that you've seen, or you may have even seen requirements, RFP requirements before. If you Google search ERP RFP requirements, there tends to be a lot out there from some of the providers that it's not uncommon to see 2,500 requirements in a giant stack of spreadsheet tabs, that it's daunting for you to complete, and it's even worse for someone to read and respond to. So an approach that we prefer is to really focus on what amounts to about between 200 and 400 requirements. And even that's a lot. But what we like to do is to have your team prioritize the requirements. So they're your requirements. We may have a boilerplate or a starting point, but these are things that come up during discovery sessions and interviews that are going to be really monumental for the success of the project. That way, when you publish your requirements, you don't have organizations, software providers responding, looking at the hundreds and hundreds of generic requirements. That communicates one thing: you guys are like everybody else. By focusing on key requirements, you're drawing attention to the areas that make you unique, or perhaps considerations of regulations and restrictions that you're not able to do. Perhaps you have some technology that isn't the newest, but you're required to keep it. So compatibility with that type of platform is going to be really critical. And it's okay to chase away the bottom feeders that frankly are in business only to respond to RFPs from public sector requests.
So here's a look at a schedule. Obviously, the kind of ERP system that you implement is going to have an impact on the timeline. If you implement an enterprise ERP like Oracle or SAP, it's probably going to be 18 months or more. But if we're working with a simpler system like Sage or Tyler or something like that, you should be able to do it in 3 to 6 months. Here are some of the things that we list as the high-level tasks and phases and approximately how long they take. This example of a project plan. Jim talked about a number of these things as he went through the process, whether it's a non-RFP or an RFP, so I won't go through all of these in detail. But I think having workshops to figure out how we prioritize as a group our requirements, which software can meet those requirements, getting some demonstrations of that, coming up with a short list of prospective clients, prospective software programs and integrators, and then working through the proposal evaluation process to select a final vendor, I think are important steps to go through as you're trying to select that ERP implementation vendor and software. Another poll for you here. What is the number one reason of ERP implementation failure? Lack of leadership commitment, poorly defined requirements, insufficient training and change management, inadequate budgeting and resource allocation. We should have had an all the above category. See what folks think about this one. Absolutely. In my experience, the insufficient training and change management tends to rise to the top. We do a lot of post-implementation assessments when a client has implemented a system and it's not meeting their requirements. And a lot of times the system is configured okay. It's just that the team wasn't really trained effectively in how to use it. So if you're going through an ERP implementation, definitely do not underinvest in training or getting the reports you need developed. Those are key factors. Jim, I think this is you here.
So when we're looking at key success factors for an ERP implementation, and we're really trying to maximize the gaps and minimize the gaps and maximize a successful set of demos and contract execution into a high-powered, high-momentum implementation, what we find is time and time again that the knowledge transfer is critical. When we say that is that you will know when you finally pick a solution, you pick a winning platform, you're under contract, that your team, your selection team will love that sales team. The demo and software and product specialists, the technical resources, their project managers that you meet as part of the sales process will be amazing. And what you'll find is the honeymoon period lasts about 48 hours until that sales team goes on to another opportunity and you're introduced to people that do this for their job. And what we see is that assisting that firm in the sales and the decision cycle of understanding what to expect and how is their sales team going to transfer the knowledge to their delivery team is going to be critical. Because where George was talking about before, about training and testing, is that we find that there's frequently a knowledge gap where the knowledge isn't transferred properly between the sales team that knew everything about you. By the time you signed a contract, they could tell you exactly what your chart of accounts was going to look like with dimensions. You are very excited to start that project, and then the project kicks off and their financial consultant sends you a spreadsheet and says, tell me about your general ledger. It's the most frustrating thing that you're thinking, how could I spend all of this time carefully identifying exactly what we need, only to reset the time for 6 weeks? It's very frustrating. It leads to implementation and configuration gaps, which hinder training and testing. So if we look over here on the ERP selection team, this really is your team. How do we make sure that the requirements and priorities that you've already produced are passed to your organization? You're going to have a selection team that's pretty exhausted by the time you make a decision, but the people that are carrying out the work need to make sure that they don't get a spreadsheet you're able to communicate that process in terms of the solution you just purchased. So how do we make sure that vendor commitments and promises, and a lot of these are not in the SOWs or in the service agreements. A lot of these are in emails. Make sure that those are copied out or printed to PDF and circulated with the team. So when something isn't quite what was promised, you have a record that you're able to go back to. So record key decision rationale clearly. I go a step further, and towards the end, insist with the vendor of recording the call for yourselves with transcription. And then lastly, the selection criteria documentation. What made this solution better than the second place solution? And I'm sure it's a coin toss, but there's going to be instances where your team gets disheartened, gets frustrated, and says, this is a piece of garbage. Why did we pick this? And they were typically not on the selection team. It's a good thing to remind them about this is why this organization chose this platform. Because ERP, as I mentioned, at the best of times, they're disruptive and expensive, which means you're quickly going to forget why you selected this platform. So again, keeping this in the front of your team's mind, sharing those customer pain points, joining a user group where you can talk to other entities that have gone through what you've gone through is really going to help grease the skids and prevent some of those speed bumps and disruptions from the team that we just see very frequently. Data migration is something that is very rarely included in the statement of work. Most of the time, there's cost constraints we have to live under. And what will happen is we end up having to pull data migration out of the statement of work from the vendor to save money and time. But what does this mean? It ends up in our lap as a governmental entity to clean and plan for our data. The other thing to look at is in the green box, dirty data. It's your opportunity to purge and not bring over to the new system everything that you're going to be looking at from your old system. We like you to migrate just the bare minimum and consider a cloud-based data repository to store your old data rather than leave your old ERP system that you thought you're getting rid of standing around so you don't have a 22-year-old personnel report that you may or may not need to run. Consider getting the data out, parking it in a cloud, and shuttering your old system. Legacy data extraction can be really difficult. Exporting to CSV sometimes is not as easy as you think. So consider during the sales process inquiring about the different vendors, and should you try to, or should you need assistance in the future, even if it's not the SOW? Do they have technical people that understand your old system? That could be an option if you get stuck with resource constraints.
So I think we've covered some of this, but common failure points and things that you need to think about as you're working through your implementation is you don't spend enough time to test the system. We typically recommend a couple conference room pilots and UAT. And it's important to make sure that your folks are who know the system and the requirements are going to be doing that testing. Poor data migration, Jim just talked about that before. What are we bringing over? Can the data in our old system, can it tie into the new system? We need to be able to tie that financially. A vendor's not going to be able to clean your data. They're not going to know what the correct data is. So that's a responsibility that you have. And that can definitely be a significant challenge. We talked about the challenge of inadequate training, big challenge for several folks, and the lack of change management. It's important to have leadership involvement and communication throughout the process, engage the new users, let them know about this system, why we're moving to it, have them be part of the process for moving to that new system so there are no surprises and they don't feel like this has been forced down their throats and they put up natural aversion to wanting to use the new system. So these are some things I think that you could run into that are common failure points, and we have some suggestions on ways to navigate through them. Who should be involved in the implementation as you get involved? I think it's important to put together executive leadership group. Those stakeholders need to set the tone and help explain why you want to move to this new ERP system and what's in it for everybody. You need to have a dedicated project team that can be working with the system that typically would contain leaders and team members. If it's going to be a financial system, obviously from the finance team and the accounting staff. It's going to be an HR system. You need your HR team on board. The CIO should be involved as well. You need some advocates and champions. Consider partners. You could get an independent consultant, or maybe someone on your team has been through an ERP implementation before. And it's important to engage them. I think don't try to implement an ERP system if no one on you and no one on your team has ever been through that before. You may want to consider an outside vendor. And it's important to vet them. Do they speak your language? Do they know financial management or human resources? How many consultants do they have? How many times have they done this before? And then how are we going to do knowledge transfer so that those folks that are involved in the sales team can transfer that knowledge to the implementation team? Can we build that into the RFP? Or if we're not doing an RFP, can we make sure that that is done and create some accountability for the integrator that's doing that? These are some critical things to think about when you're standing up your project team to get ready for that ERP implementation.
So looking at getting close to go live, what kind of cutover strategy, what are items that you should think about? And again, these items, in our opinion, are a critical success factor and a selection factor in choosing the right solution before you sign on the dotted line. All of these things should be right up front when you are validating multiple vendors and multiple implementation partners. You should be asking them, what does a structured plan look like for a go live on your platform? Ask them about parallel processing. The short answer is don't do parallel processing, but see what they say. It's going to be important for them to make sure that they're not telling you what's easy for them. Sometimes thorough testing and pre-launch validations are really where you should be. That builds confidence in the users weeks before you cut over. But anytime you have someone that recommends that you run old and new systems in parallel, essentially, unless they're prepared to double your ERP administrative staff for zero, you're really asking your team that by that point close to go live is already pretty tired and worn out. The last thing you want to do is to have somebody give 50% effort to the old system and 50% to the new. That will frustrate your users and blow up your close. And then lastly, understanding that you could get some guidance, but you really need to map out your own cutover plan. And how do we make sure that open transactions and opening balances are reconciled with your previous system? How do you engage with your auditors prior to cutover so that everyone understands what's happening? Right, so let's say you've gone live and you've had a very successful cutover and everyone's happy and you're doing your victory lap. Now what? So really what you want to do is to say there's going to be things that you didn't get to in an implementation that were post-go live dues, those phase twos, those nice to haves. So how do you understand and how do you phase those platforms and solutions out to really drive efficiencies within your organization? So think about the type of support that you're going to need. Was this part of the sales cycle? Is there a help desk? Are there ways to practice and test in a sandbox or a test environment? How do you make sure your users are actually using the system? A lot of times when your ERP is replaced, if you had those systems that you could not replace, how do we make sure that users don't revert to their old bad Excel habits? How do we make sure that users are logging in and doing their daily validation? This can really slow things down with modern approval-based workflows. If you have, for example, people are getting notifications to approve purchase requisitions, but they're only going in once a week rather than every day as needed. Think about how that's disruptive to people that are playing by the rules when they can't operate because approvals aren't happening at the same level of timeliness. So again, continuous improvement. How do you make sure that items that the squeaky wheels and the support issues are getting the right attention, but you don't fall into the trap of chasing after defects within the first go live? You're never going to hit perfect. So don't stop improving and extending into your platform. Number 4, what type of support model should you be looking at? We're a strong supporter of self-help and building internal skills on your team. Build those subject matter experts. Keep them away from the island of IT. IT is there for a reason, but your ERP expert should be in the business. And then work with your implementer to develop best practices, and use a dedicated project manager on the vendor side. And you should retain your project manager that led to this successful cutover in a leadership role within your ERP implementation so that they can continue to drive change.
All right. Second to last polling question. Which type of ERP system do you use? Tyler, NetSuite, Sage, Microsoft, or other? That to come up, maybe introduce our panel here. And Bob and Zach, if you can come off video and unmute yourselves. I want to thank you both for being here today. We're going to talk a little bit about your experiences working through an ERP system implementation. And Bob is the Chief Financial Officer for the City of Republic, Missouri. And Zach is the Chief Information Officer for the Greenville-Spartanburg Airport District. And I think it's great to get perspectives from the CFO and the technology side of the house. And it's important, you have to collaborate as you're doing those implementations. So we love to got a couple questions for the panelists just to share some of their experiences about that. And welcome to both of you. So I'll start with the first question, and maybe start with you, Bob, as you think about ERP systems that you've been involved with, whether it be an old system or a new system. What are some of the challenges that you faced as a city CFO in selecting a new system or moving to the new system? Anything you want to share about your experiences there?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here. As a bit of background, I joined the City of Republic about 2.5 years ago, and quickly figured out that the ERP that we have in place really wasn't getting the job done. It wasn't very user-friendly. Report generation was difficult at best. So much of the financial analysis and report generation was being done in Excel. I'm sure this is happening in a lot of places across the United States. And while I love Excel, it has a place, and report generation on a monthly basis is not the best use of that tool. About the same time, we had begun to look at other specific software solutions, such as budgeting and forecasting, AP automation. Those applications that were native to our ERP solution were not very robust. And so we were looking to the outside, looking to a third party to provide sort of best of breed or best in class with regards to those specific activities. And so it became apparent that we have these competing things going on. We have these outside third-party applications that we want to start using as a city. At the same time, they don't play well with our existing ERP. At that point, the big users of the ERP, finance, human resources, utility billing, began to do hours and hours of whiteboarding. What do we need? What do we want out of an ERP? And an ERP being, in the broad sense, being not only the accounting engine, but also payroll, HR, onboarding, utility billing, all of those components. And as we went through that process, it became sort of painful to us, or painfully obvious to us, that there were things that we didn't know what we didn't know. We knew that the city had implemented an ERP solution that we currently had in place. They had done that 7 years before. And here we were at a point in time where we were not happy with what we had. So we did a bit of post-mortem on what happened before. One of the reasons we selected the existing ERP is we heard, well, it's what our sister city down the road uses. Well, not a great reason to select them. At 7 years ago, the city didn't engage a third-party advisor to help in the process. And then once the ERP that we currently had in place was selected, much of the workflow and much of the processes in the old ERP were just replicated in the new ERP. Why do that? So it became very clear to us that we needed to hire help. We needed to hire help to help us understand what it is that we didn't know and to help craft a path forward. So we went through an RFP process to engage an ERP advisory firm. We got about 8 responses. We interviewed 4 finalists, and ultimately selected Cherry Bekaert to be our solution to that situation. Hey, help us figure out what it is that we need. So I think the moral to that story, George and Jim, is that if you can, engage an advisor to help you and get them involved early, get them involved right up front on the needs assessment portion, all the way through RFP generation, all the way up through actual ERP selection, and all the way into the implementation process.
Thanks, Bob. That's great. How about you, Zach? You want to share your experience and what your role was in selecting and implementing new ERP solution for the airport?
Yeah, sure thing. A very similar story, it sounds like. Go back to airports are very similar in the same way. We share that information out. So we don't compete much with each other, but we do share information. So very similar to Bob. At our industry conferences, we all talk to one another. So what are you using? What are you using? What selection did you go with? And I think sometimes, what Bob had mentioned is that that's the safe bet, to go with what somebody else went with. And we just didn't want to go down that path. And so, we went with, I think on Jim's slide 5 is that core ERP, that center foundation. We wanted to find out what that was, what that meant for our organization, what's going to best fit GSP and lead us into that future, and then work towards the outside of that. What you had mentioned, Bob, is that we did that same thing. I've been working with Jim almost 7 years now. So we started our ERP implementation process in 2018 by the selection of what I would consider you all as a guide. As you're going to go through this process, you want to have a guide that's going to get you to the other side and go through these key requirements, the successes of whatever somebody else went through, that process that Jim talked about. And bringing all the stakeholders in, what are the most important things that you need, what you don't need, and be able to go through that, what you need. We did that same selection process. I would equate that to your phone platform. Most of us have Apple or Android, but while we might have similar applications on those devices, I would suggest that I'm probably the only one that has MatBoss on there that tracks wrestling matches that you're at, so you can see the stats on that. So my son does that, but there might be one other in the crowd that has that app, but we all probably have that same foundation. So the foundation is critical to the success of the organization. And I would say, as you go through that, when you're selecting that, you need to be conscious of, your culture, your talent, your needs. Make sure it fits what is inside of your environment, not what is going to fit somebody else. So I think that's critical.
Yeah, thanks. Those are great insights, and appreciate you all sharing that. Now, one thing that we often think about is, and Bob, you alluded to this, is, why are we doing things the same way we used to do them? So how do you approach looking at what a new system can do and looking at how you do business, your business processes, and ways to rethink them so that you can adapt the new solution as it's intended to be used without customizing it? Any lessons learned that you want to share there? I'll start with you, Bob, around that.
Yeah, I as we're not totally completely implemented at this point in time with our new ERP, but as we've gone through this process, if we go back to the basic foundation of where we were about 1.5 years ago, we made the decision very early on that we were going to adopt a best of breed approach, recognizing that probably meant that there were going to be separate software solutions that we were going to need to integrate with each other. And so in that sort of process modernization, procedure, workflow enhancement, trying to improve all of those things, we knew that was going to be a bit of a challenge, which is one of the reasons we chose to bring in an advisor to help us, because we knew that was, even though that conceptually made a ton of sense to us, we knew multiple software solutions needing to integrate with each other was going to be a bit of a challenge. As you say, as I said, that added complexity to the ultimate sort of basket of software solutions that we put in place, even though everyone was saying, hey, we're open API, everything will connect with everything else, don't worry. I think I heard Jim say this earlier. The sales guy promises the world, and then the next day reality sets in. We heard a lot of, yeah, sure, product A is going to integrate well with product B. Sometimes that takes a lot of work to make that no problem part kind of come to reality. And so I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record here, but hire help. Get an independent third party like Jim and his team to come in and help with this process, because as great as it sounds conceptually and as great as it's going to be once it's fully implemented, there will be challenges in actually getting the new software solutions deployed.
How about you, Zach, in terms of, how much business process change has your organization gone through as you've been implementing new ERP and related systems? And how important has that been in your journey?
It's been, again, I think that's the foundation of where we were and the process of choosing the right vendor. So to go through this, so we started with that foundation, um, you know, with our core financials, human capital resource management, expense management. We have a revenue management solution, financial planning management. Since we run and operate our FBO, so we have an FBO solution, an enterprise asset management solution. All of these going through that process. When I say that, then you go back and you talk about the process and system implementation, or why is it so critical? I say all that because we didn't have any of that before. So 8 years ago, a lot of it was Excel driven, paper based reports you can't get out. Financials are not out on time. Again, this is some of the key pains that Jim mentioned, is your financials aren't getting out on time. You can't get stuff out. You're looking to legacy systems, a lot of paper based. So the challenge is, I think some people think by implementing a solution and forgetting the process modernization, you think that the system is going to fix the process. Or if you bring over that process, you just try to fit it into the new system, you're not going to gain anything of real value. So you've got to reevaluate those processes as you're going through this. That's really critical up front. What do you want to see on the other side of the system that you're implementing? And what are those processes that you want to fix? What are the things that you want to modernize through that? Again, of all the implementations that we've gone through and put these things in, it's also critical on how that relationship is going to be between the multi-systems, right? So for us, for human capital resource management or expense management, I know Bob mentioned open APIs. Is there going to be a connector between the two? We use Workato as that middleware. It is the solution of choice for us. It's something that we want to make sure that if we choose that vendor, that thing is going to go through that product to be able to get into our core financials. Again, those things are going to be critical for that process implementation or modernization. I think Jim and I sat on a panel one other time and we talked about being able to take your process. A lot of people will continue to do the thing that they've done previously. So if they were doing something in Excel before, they'll just migrate that process with them. They'll continue to do that and do whatever you've asked them to do in the future, mitigating any kind of real efficiencies you were supposed to be able to gain through that. So something to consider when you're going through that. Look at what you're doing. Try not to fit what you've done in the past into the future. Really look at what you've done to change. So process is going to be critical.
Yeah, those are such great insights, Bob and Zach. I really appreciate it. And apologies, I know we started with you all a little bit later than we had hoped because Jim and I were so excited talking about ERP challenges and pitfalls. We went long. But I think we're at time now, so I want to thank everybody that joined us today, especially a huge thank you to Zach and Bob for taking time out of your day to join us. And we really appreciate it. I think we have one more panel question, if I'm not mistaken. And if you would like someone to reach out to talk about ERP challenges that you may have, let us know. We'll be happy to reach out. And I'll turn it back over to you, Danny, to close us out. This was the
Perfect.
last session, right? We're
Yes,
still
sir.
seeing folks in
Congratulations.
today.
Yep.
Okay.
That
All
was
right.
great. Thank you all for your presentation, and thank you all to the attendees for sticking with us for our 2-day virtual conference. As George said, this concludes our government public sector virtual conference. Greatly appreciate you all attending. We work really hard to give you a best-in-class CPE experience. Yes, we do this every year, so you be on the lookout next year. But within the year, we do one-off webinars, podcasts, articles at cbh.com. Please take a short survey, which will show up when you leave the session. Sessions recordings will be available in about a week. You can connect with any of our presenters on LinkedIn or on the website. If you answered yes to this polling question 4 in any of our sessions, you will be reached out to within the nenext week. But if you have a Cherry Bekaert contact, feel free to reach out to them as well. That's fine. We appreciate your participation. As always, thank you so much. Thank you for allowing us this 2 days to be able to give back to you all, to be able to share everything that we've learned. Best of luck as you continue in your year-end close or closing out fiscal year 25. Have a great rest of your day.